Hi, and welcome to the 700 Club. I'm Andrew Knox in for Gordon Robertson today. Israel is outraged by the murder of the Bibas family and the treatment of hostages. In response, they're holding up the release of Palestinian prisoners. Prime Minister Netanyahu is also demanding Hamas end the humiliating transfer ceremonies in Gaza.
Last Saturday, Hamas released 6 more live hostages. Now negotiators are hoping to extend phase 1 of the ceasefire to get more hostages out immediately. CBN's Julie Stahl has that story.
Israel put the release of some 600 Palestinian prisoners on hold to protest Hamas's brutal murders of hostage Shiri Bibas and her children, Ariel and Kfir, whose bodies were returned last week. Israel is also protesting the terror group's humiliation of hostages at staged handover ceremonies in Gaza. The latest outrage is a Hamas propaganda video showing 2 hostages who were brought to Saturday's release of 6 other hostages, but then were taken back into captivity. In the Knesset, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held up photos of the slain Bibases and asked Israeli lawmakers to never forget.
This photo says it all, and I ask you will engrave it on your heart, to always remember what we are fighting against and against who we are fighting.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote on X, Hamas's treatment of hostages, including its brutal murder of the Bibas family, further illustrates their savagery and is yet another reason why we are saying these terrorists must release all of the hostages immediately or be destroyed. Critics are also ripping into the Associated Press for how it's framing the Bibas killings. Democrat lawmaker Richie Torres said on X, the AP chooses to whitewash the baby killers, calling them militants rather than terrorists, and claiming the children died rather than were murdered in captivity. Disgraceful. Republican Senator Mike Lee wrote, Hamas murdered these hostages. They didn't just die in captivity, as if by natural causes. Why does AP want to sugarcoat this? President Trump weighed in after the latest freeing of 6 more hostages this past weekend.
But they're coming back in pretty bad shape. It's a horrible thing, and many are dead. Many are dead. So we'll see how that all ends up.
There's talk of extending phase 1 of the ceasefire deal to get more hostages freed as soon as possible. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff told CNN that talks for a phase 2 are expected this week.
We do expect it, Jake, to go forward. We have to get an extension of phase 1.
But Trump's national security advisor said on Fox News that Hamas is threatening all by its horrifying actions.
This behavior over this last week with these children, with how these people have been released, this propaganda absolutely is affecting the prospects of negotiations.
Meanwhile, after thwarting last week's terror plot to blow up at least 15 Israeli buses, the IDF is ramping up efforts to destroy the growing terror threat from Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank.
For the first time in decades, in Judea and Samaria, tanks have entered. This means one thing. We fight terrorism by all means and everywhere.
On another front, Israeli military jets flew over the funeral of former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut. The same day, the IDF also released video of the massive Israeli airstrike that killed Nasrallah back in September. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Julie. Julie mentioned that those buses that exploded, that would have been a massacre if it hadn't failed as far as planning is concerned. And that story has been a blip on the screen. It's in the rearview mirror already. One wonders if Hamas is intentionally sabotaging peace talks and ceasefires. You have children not just killed, but murdered. You have 2 hostages let out for release and then taken back. Now we have Israeli tanks in the West Bank for the first time in 20 years as things continue to escalate. Thank you, Julie, for your reporting.